Coming up, Senate hearing,
Ukraine,
Cosmos,
and Spaceplane.
All that, plus we talk about astronomical property rights. Stay with us. Tomorrow begins now.
Flag up now, and you can see the sergeant's
private space station.
And welcome to Spacevidcast episode 7.07 for Saturday, March 8th, 2014. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, talented, and Carrie-Ann wife of mine, Carrie-Ann Higginbotham. I didn't get that in the beginning, so I had to change it at the end. We will be your hosts for this episode. Before we get started, we'd like to thank the Spacevidcast Premier members. These are people who have dedicated at least $10 for this specific episode available at patreon.com/spacevidcast. These guys are what are sponsoring this first news part of the segment. They're what make this show happen. And for more information, and if you'd like to become a Spacevidcast Premier member, please go to patreon.com/spacevidcast for more information on that. So let's go ahead and get started with some space news. I think the big thing that really happened this last week was the Senate hearing over the EELV, or Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicles. This was on Wednesday, March 5th, 2014, so just a few days ago. This was between Michael Gass, who's the president of United Launch Alliance, the conglomerate between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and Elon Musk, the CEO and CTO of Space Exploration Technologies. And as you can imagine, I wanted it to be like an epic wrestling match, right? Where they walk out and like
an
fireworks.
Ordinary couple having like one of those debates of like, no, when you said this last time, that's not what you did.
Oh, like People's Court.
Yeah, that's what I wanted, and that's not what happened.
No, it was jam-packed full of interesting information from both sides. So if you, rather than cut this up into little itty-bitty sound bites, it is like an hour and a half. It's actually worth going in and watching the whole thing. You can find it on YouTube. We'll add a link to it in the show notes. This is the future of our military launch system, which is a very large contract, which can help other companies too. So it's a big deal. The key points between the two sides here are, from United Launch Alliance, which is, since they've been formed, they've had a 100% success rate. And military launches are not like commercial launches.
Right.
These are billion-dollar satellites. They are extremely important to national security, and you have very specific requirements that they need to maintain. For example, absolute launch readiness at any time.
Right.
And so that's expensive. That costs money, and that's the way it is. And SpaceX basically says, well, okay, except that you're a monopoly, and as you can expect with any monopoly, your prices have gone up. And had you gone with SpaceX's launch services, you could have saved, I think it was something like $11.6 billion with a B dollars. That's actually, by the way, half of NASA's entire budget in 1 year. They would have been able to save, according to SpaceX. So two very different sides of the argument. I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong. It's just an interesting debate, and I'd love to know what your comments are. Is it important enough to spend the extra billions of dollars to ensure launch readiness and launch reliability, or should we be looking at commercial partners? But, by the way, it doesn't have to mean SpaceX.
Right. No, absolutely
It could open the door to other providers to be doing military launches as well. Keep in mind, this only impacts military launches. It does not impact commercial launches. And one other point that SpaceX made, which was, look, NASA uses us and we go to the International Space Station. If we're good enough for NASA, I don't understand why we're not good enough for the military. So, really interesting. I don't want to call it a heated debate. It wasn't. It was a very mellow, just kind of this the whole way.
Right.
And I was hoping for that People's Court yelling, someone throwing lamps across the room.
Right.
That's not what it is. But it is absolutely jam-packed full of information. Highly recommend watching it. Like I said, future of military launch. Speaking of, one of the things that Elon Musk mentioned was that United Launch Alliance right now flies the Delta IV and the Atlas V. And the thing with the Atlas V, the engines, not made in America, they're made in Russia. And we got a little bit of tension going on over there.
Yeah, so for anyone who's been following the Ukraine issue, while it is its own mangled mess of issues, which I did read up on it because I didn't understand exactly what was going on in the first place, but aside from that, the impact it could have on the space industry, particularly in the United States, is actually a lot larger, I think, than a lot of us even realize. So the United States can only ferry astronauts on the Soyuz rocket, which is Russian, at $70 million per seat.
Yep.
So there's that. The NASA's commercial crew program may not be able to fly humans until 2017. So it's 2014 now. That's 3 years from now. That's kind of a big gap, considering that NASA, the United States, hasn't flown humans on their own rockets, NASA's rockets or U.S. rockets, really, since 2011. So that's a huge gap.
Retired in the space shuttle.
On the space shuttle. The commercial crew program currently has Boeing, SpaceX, and Sierra Nevada, who are developing crew-capable rockets and spaceships.
But as you mentioned, all of those companies are at least out till 2017.
At least 2017.
Yep.
So even when you're looking at the current U.S. made or U.S. companied rockets, of those, the Atlas V, as you were talking about, uses the Russian-made RD-180s, and the Antares rocket uses Ukrainian-built first stage. So those two are like straight out, even if we wanted to try and bring everything back to the U.S. anyhow.
Well, they don't have to be, but they could be.
Right. So it's a really odd sort of situation that we, as the United States space industry, is having right now. Because Russia could theoretically just cut off ties and be like, you know what, it's cool. I know you paid for those seats, but we don't feel like flying astronauts anymore.
Now, it is more complex than that, though, because keep in mind, if
Absolutely.
they do that, we can cut off their areas of the International Space Station, which would be power and communications. So it's not like, I'm not sure that any of that will happen, but it does raise some interesting points of, we've had this amazing collaboration with Russia for so many years, and now we've got this tension with Russia. What if things start to break down? What happened to the Atlas V engines?
Exactly.
What happens to the engines for Orbital's Antares rocket? What are the future of these things? Which is part of Elon Musk's point, which is get rid of the Atlas V, use the Delta IV, which uses US-based Pratt and Whitney Rocketdyne engines. It uses Rocketdyne engines. So
It's a little frustrating, and the other thing that's sort of just putting a bad smell on this entire situation for, again, the United States human flight programs is that Congress has decreased NASA's CCP, or the commercial program's funding request, by about 50% each year, and the first commercial flight, has been postponed for more than 3 years, up to 2017. So it's just really frustrating right now. It would be really nice if Congress just decided to, you know what, you're right, maybe we're doing some stupid stuff here. Why don't we just give NASA all the money that they're asking for? And then they can dole it out as need be. And then, Boeing, SpaceX, and Sierra Nevada can just pop these suckers out, no problem.
Yeah, so Ghost to 2501 asked, with the shuttle decommissioned and tensions between U.S. and Russia, could U.S. build a new shuttle craft? Well, actually, Sierra Nevada is working on a little miniature shuttle that will still be able to ferry 7 astronauts. Ironically, though, it launches on top of a Atlas V rocket, which uses those Russian engines.
Right.
So
That's the issue.
now there's little reason they couldn't move it over to a Delta IV, right? They'll just have to change some of the ferrying and interconnect systems, but that's an engineering challenge, absolutely overcomable. So it's completely possible to do that. But again, they're out till at least 2017, which means we got a 3-year gap here.
Right.
So,
it's rough. It's rough right now. It's a little bit scary.
It could be that space ends up being that kind of unifying thing, because I don't think Russia wants to give up that 70 million per seat. Right. I think one seat basically pays for the entire flight, and you get the other 2 for free for the most part. So I don't think Russia really wants to give that up. So I don't know what's really going to happen, but interesting nonetheless how all of this is intertwined and kind of comes together. Now, on some better notes and some cooler notes, for those who loved the original Carl Sagan, a personal journey, the new version of Cosmos by Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, a Space-Time Odyssey, comes out tomorrow.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm super excited. Now, some people got to watch this in advance and see the pre-run show. I am uber excited about this. I think hopefully this will get people really, really excited about space, the stars, the cosmos, right? And I'm gonna watch it. We've got our DVR set to record it. It's tomorrow. It's Sunday. It's on the Fox network in the U.S. I'm pretty sure there's worldwide distribution of it. If you search for Cosmos online, there's just a ton of channels that'll be covering
there's like
this.
8 channels. It's a joint effort between National Geographic channels, their own different channels, and Fox channels, which is really exciting. So they are doing a really huge effort to try and reach as many people as possible. This isn't just like a silly little Fox thing, or what have you. This is a real effort, and I'm really proud of them.
I'm going to whip through. I want to get through all these news stories, so I'm going to whip through them fairly quickly so that we can get through all of these. Space planes. We're familiar with Virgin Galactic, and we're familiar with X-Corp. We've talked about those a lot on the show. Well, here's another one. This is from Airbus Group. This is something that they're planning on hopefully building. Now, they may not operate it themselves. It may actually be operated by other space tourist companies. This was designed in 2007. The reason we're bringing it up is they've got a model of this. It's a 4.6 meter scale model. They're going to bring it up to 11,887 meters and drop it from a helicopter. This is about 1/4 the actual size of the spacecraft. There you can see the model that they're going to be dropping. Now, the way this will work is going to work, it's a space plane. So with the non-model version of this is going to fly up to 11,887 meters. And then from there, uses rockets on board to bring it up to 59,741 meters. So it's a suborbital space plane that you'll be able to go around in. And there's this... you can search for a video on that. It's really cheesy. We chose not to air it with like those like astronaut kind of like looking like I'm an astronaut now. But so they're working on that. And then the interesting thing is how long it's going to be in between these drop tests. So the first drop test, if I didn't say, it was going to be May, and it will be in Singapore. The drop test after that, if that goes as expected, next year, 2015. Yeah, but so maybe I don't know. I don't know why the delay. Maybe it's just data gathering, figuring out what they need to tweak. But, moving towards a third major spaceplane manufacturer.
Awesome.
Yeah, go back 10 years.
Yeah.
Imagine being like, 3 competing companies for space planes.
No, not so
you
much.
wouldn't even think that. No. The original wooden shuttle mock-up may be moving. This is currently in Downey. That's actually, they have it. Well, there you go. There you see it.
That's what it looks like.
It is not Pathfinder. That's actually, I was mistaken. I was talking to Tim a while ago, and I'm like, oh, dude, it's Pathfinder. He's like, no. This is before Pathfinder. Pathfinder being the mock-up that they had to make sure that the shuttle could make it all the clearances, make it into the VAB. This was well before that. This is actually a wooden mock-up of, here's kind of what we think it might sort of kind of look like. Has like one wing, and it's right here in Downey, and they're going to be moving it. And there's no say as to if they're going to protect it or what they're going to do or what's going on, but they're going to begin relocating the shuttle mock-up next week into a maintenance yard. One final note before we go to break. Yeah, I know, right?
Go space.
Go Downey? Is it... So it's like pre-shuttle, right? When you look at the image, it's pretty not impressive.
Right.
But it is that thing that they kind of use to visualize
Yeah, it's
and
still history.
help sell the shuttle, but it's not Enterprise.
Yeah.
It's not Pathfinder.
Yeah.
It's not Space Shuttle Adventure.
No.
Which was that. Anyhow. So I don't know. I think it's a little bit sad. Hopefully they'll protect it. I think it is a piece of history, as you mentioned. But before we go to break, as a reminder, I am wearing my Citizens Against Daylight Saving Time shirt. No daylight saving time. However, about half the world does honor daylight saving time, and this show is based in Coordinated Universal Time, which does not honor daylight saving time. This show is always 2100 UTC. For those of you who are in Greenwich Mean Time, it's the same thing. It's 2100 Greenwich Mean Time. If you change your clocks, that means you are honoring you are honoring daylight saving time. And the show time for you will change. It will be 1 hour later. For those of you in the U.S., it's going to be 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So remember that starting next week, this show will be 1 hour later for you if you change your clock. If you are not in an area of the world that changes its clock, the show time will remain the same for you. It's always 2100 UTC. Now, with that note, in my absolute disgust for daylight saving time. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be speaking with Thomas about 2 episodes ago. We had Get Off My Lunar Lawn. He's going to be talking about property rights on alien surfaces like the moon, Mars, and beyond. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Look into her face, determination in her eyes. She won't give up or quit or fall for little fashion lies. Filled with awesome expectation, this girl's a fascination. And nothing in her way will keep her from her destination. 'Cause she's fire walking, she's fire walking. When it's hot, she keeps on moving. Through the heat, keeps on improving. Yeah, she's fire walking, she's fire walking to be free.
Now, 2 weeks ago or so. Oh no, I can't even go into that yet. I'm a terrible human being. For this segment of Spacevidcast has been sponsored by and brought to you by the Spacevidcast patrons who are at the producer level. That's anyone who's paid anywhere between $5 to $10. So these are the Spacevidcast producers who are making this section of Spacevidcast go. Remember, Spacevidcast does take time and money to produce, and it's people like this that help bring this show to you. So a huge thank you to all of the Spacevidcast producers who help make this show happen. And if you'd like more information on how to help Spacevidcast continue to produce shows, go to patreon.com/SpaceVidcast. All right, so let me get back into my main train of thought. 2 weeks ago, we had our show, Get Off My Lunar Lawn, and there was a fantastic comment by Thomas, who is a law student, and it was really long talking about it, and I didn't want to not bring it onto the show, but I also couldn't bring it into the comment section because it was too long. So instead, we said, Thomas, would you please join us on Spacevidcast? And he said, absolutely. So Thomas, thank you so much for joining us live on Spacevidcast. Let's talk a little bit about property rights on places like the moon and Mars and beyond. So first, can you talk a little bit about your comment that you left on last week, or the show 2 weeks ago?
Okay, there's a number of things that I said in that comment, as you mentioned. But the main thing about property rights is the one thing that's the Outer Space Treaty, which is the main piece of legislation in space law. It's often referred to as the Magna Carta of space law, is that national governments cannot lay claim to celestial bodies. National appropriation by any means is completely and utterly banned. That further extends to private corporations because the governments have responsibilities regarding to private individuals and private companies. So the general question then comes is, what does that mean in regards to property rights? You discuss the idea of a Bigelow hotel, and can you own the land that that's on and maybe have an exclusionary zone around it? Most people, and in fact the leading textbook on space law says that you can't have legal title to immovable property without de facto national appropriation of territory, which obviously presents a problem. Because law as it is at the moment says that you can't own the moon.
And you mentioned not just you can't own the moon, the government can't own the moon, and through that, private entities also can't own the moon.
Right.
Exactly, and that extends to all celestial bodies. I mean, there are people who will argue that you can extract title to property through a different mechanism, but that's generally not accepted by most people. Because obviously John Locke argued that you can take a title to property by mixing your labor with the soil, which is what he said in his book. That's generally not regarded. Most people regard title as coming from the government. It's something that's recognized by your government, and therefore it's an act of national sovereignty, which is specifically banned by the Outer Space Treaty. As far as mineral resources go, that's a bit more of a tricky area that people don't necessarily definitive answer for. It's generally agreed that taking, say, water in order to fuel and hydrate your spacecraft and astronauts would be acceptable. Doing it for commercial purposes is a tricky gray area that there's a lot of debate on, but there aren't any real definitive answers.
How is any of this enforceable? So let's just say Bigelow goes to the moon and they say, okay, I put my base here. I lay claim to the moon. Stop me.
Well, it's enforceable in the sense that it would be enforceable on Earth. He would need a license in order to launch his rocket in the first place. And there's the possibility of not giving him the license, so he wouldn't be able to launch it. And then, unless it's going to be a self-sustaining space hotel from the get-go, and you're not going to send any tourists to it, because any subsequent launch to resupply it or send tourists to it is also going to require a license. And you can deny them the license, because all the governments of the launching states are responsible for the launches. Plus, you can put sanctions on his company as it exists on Earth.
I think in our chat room, Chris Radcliffe brought... I'm sorry, go ahead.
It is generally agreed that once a colony got going on, say, Mars, it would develop its own legal culture, and this sort of stuff, the space law as it exists now, would have to accept the existence of the colony. But it's how do you get that started?
Yes.
When you're dependent on getting a launch license from, say, the US government.
Yeah, and actually that was kind of what Chris Radcliffe was saying in the chat room to a point. He said, Earthbound governments can't own property, but a new government formed on a new body can then grant titles. So if we somehow get to the moon, the government can't own that, but you could, in theory, start a new government for the moon on the moon from the people you've sent to the moon. Does that make sense?
It's getting a colony started.
So how... At that point, that gets complicated. So it's a chicken egg scenario. Is there a way around this, or do we just have to do it and work it out as we're going?
Well, there's lots of debates about it, and there's certainly plenty of academics who write on this issue. As far as asteroid mining goes, I think that somebody just needs to do it, and then it will get dealt with that way. If Deep Space Industries or Planetary Resources go and bring back some material, then it will just have to get dealt with. But otherwise, I think it's just going to go around in circles as a debate. Because there are two groups of people who feel very strongly about it. You've got one group who most of us would sympathize, who want to allow asteroid mining, because the only way you're going to build colonies on Mars is if it's economically viable to do so. But you've got another group who are dead set against it and want to ban it as much as possible. So I think somebody just needs to be bold and go and do it. But we are talking about an awful lot of money if you wind up being on the wrong side of the law.
Yeah, that's kind of the crux of it, right? Because you want to have, and that's where Bigelow's coming from, which is he wants to have a good business case for this, and he wants to make sure that he's on the right side of the law before he spends the billions it will take to set up a lunar or Martian or whatever colony. He wants to say, look, I'm going to do this. I want to be guaranteed this land and a little bit of a keep-out zone. I want to own this property. I mean, he's a property guy, right? That's what he does on Earth. That's how he made his money here.
But the other problem with a hotel situation would be that you're not allowed to deny people access to celestial bodies. Furthermore, there's a requirement to allow inspections of your outposts. And so the whole, not only is the ownership of lunar territory specifically banned, but the idea of being able to keep somebody out of your outpost on the moon is also specifically banned.
Oh, that's interesting. So if I build a lunar colony and you come and visit, I have to let you in the door. Legally right now, I have to let you in. And that's worldwide law? Whose law is that?
It's international treaties. The Outer Space Treaty has been signed by a huge over 150 countries, including the United States. There are a couple of other treaties that have been signed up by large numbers of countries, but not everybody. But all the major space powers have signed up to them, except for the Moon Agreement, which is generally regarded as a failed treaty. Because only 14 countries have signed that, and none of them are space powers.
So, what are some other gotchas that we haven't even considered, right? Because we're not lawyers. We don't know. We don't think about these things. We go, "Yay, space, let's go!" And then other people are like, "Okay, but do you own it? What's going on?" What are some other things that us space
Well-
geeks haven't thought about?
One of your stories was on space planes.
Yes.
Space planes will have the difficulty of they're both aircraft and they're space objects. So they will be subject to both aviation law and space law, which is the contradiction of the fact that space objects are allowed innocent passage, which means they can fly through somebody else's airspace on their way to outer space. However, an aircraft is subject to territorial airspace. So it's legitimate for a country to say, no, you can't fly your aircraft through our airspace. But they couldn't do the same thing for a space object. So you have a situation where your space plane is subject to both aviation law and space law, and there's quite a lot of contradictions between the two. So that's something that needs to be resolved. There's also the issue that, for legal purposes, there's actually no boundary between space and the atmosphere. While scientists have got some definitions where it begins, there's no. So it doesn't say that outer space starts at 80 kilometers, for example. There's no definition given as to where the boundary is.
That seems weird to me. Like, how do you create law or rules when you don't have a boundary set from a legal standpoint? Right. Or has it never been a requirement before? We haven't hit that. We're just now starting to hit
It's never really been a requirement. There's a clear definition of aircraft in the Chicago Convention of 1944. And space vehicles, as we've had them yet, have not fit that definition. It's thought that we could go with I favor taking the objective. So a vehicle that's going to outer space to do outer space things would be considered a space object. But that's not a generally agreed upon thing. But it seems to make sense to me.
So, I have a question, if I may. How does any of this relate to not property of the moon, but property on the moon, such as the anything that's been left behind or anything that's landed on the moon that has been made by different governments, and or like the Google Lunar X Prize shortly should have, fingers crossed, landers and rovers on the moon. And while as much as I would love to see a rover battle on the moon, from the moon, it seems to me that there would be some issues regarding that. Whether that be one of the rovers rolling over some of the Apollo equipment, or even footsteps, or anything along those lines. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there any laws about you can't touch my stuff that I've left there? And then as a follow-up, there is Richard Garriott purchased a lander that it currently resides on the moon. As far as we know, that basically makes him the only private person to own something that's on the moon. And is there anything surrounding that of either anyone touching it, or he can claim that or not actually claim that? Did he just basically waste his money by naming a star? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, the person who owns the object when they launch it retains ownership of it. So the NASA retains ownership of the descent stage of Apollo 11, and in fact they remain liable for it. So if something, I can't imagine a scenario in which it would happen, but if say the descent stage were to fall onto and crush China's rover, then the Chinese could sue the United States for damages.
Nice.
Obviously that's not going to happen, but just as an example.
Mm-hmm.
As for transferring ownership, it can happen with communication satellites. A company that launched the satellite can then sell it to another company, and that has happened. And it's incredibly complex international contract law, but it has happened and it's possible. So I would imagine the same thing for a rover on the moon. And in fact, as far as the space hotel idea has gone, it has been suggested that the building you could own, you could have title to the building because it's a space object, but you wouldn't own the land that it sits on.
This is so we've basically run out of time for the segment. This is all really fascinating stuff. Hopefully you'll be able to. We're going to post this all to YouTube. Hopefully you'll be able to answer a few questions if some Space Vidcasters have additional questions on laws and treaties and what you can and can't do in space. We'd love to have you come in and comment and leave your remarks. This has been really awesome. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to explain what's actually going on up there. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about comments from last week's show. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
1, 0. Liftoff.
The fleet of space shuttles were doing amazing things in space.
We've got all your space geekery right here.
And welcome back to Space Vidcast. This section of Space Vidcast is brought to you by the Space Vidcast patrons. These are people who spend anywhere... That's our first comment. These are people who spend anywhere from $1 up to $4.99. And I didn't put it in the rundown. So we will... we'll go. You know what? We'll go into comments and then we'll come back to that. So let's actually go back to the very first comment and thank the Space Vidcast patrons, by the way. Let's go into the very first comment, which we were talking about metric versus imperial units, and overwhelmingly, I was really surprised by this. Overwhelmingly, 99% of the people, including those in the U.S., said, make it metric. You'll notice everything we did in this show was metric. And so from 2001 Lexitilians, metric is the future. At which point, we got a couple of replies. The next person replied with, this is Talks with Dirt, said, are you saying you'd walk a mile for a kilometer?
Aha.
At which point, 2001 Lexitilians replied with, well, let's say I'd walk 1.6 kilometers. You guys...
You're funny.
You're funny. You guys are funny. That was funny. Bonus points. All right. So there you go. Oh! You got the Patreon thing. So let's bring that up on screen really quick because it is very important and it is what makes this show go. So these are the people that for anywhere between $1 and $4.99. And the neat thing about Patreon is you can subscribe to any amount you want. The way this works is you say, look, I'd like to fund these episodes. And we have different goals. And you can say, I'm going to get you 50 cents per episode, or I'm going to give you $1 per episode, or I'm going to give you $10 an episode, or $5. You set the number. You tell us what you think Space Vidcast is worth, what value you got out of it. And just to mess with some of the Space Vidcasters, someone has done odd numbers. So we're currently at $324.12 per show, which means we did reach our $200 goal, but we have not made it to the $400 goal. Is that what you're laughing at? The
Yes,
12 cents?
yes,
The
yes,
12 cents.
absolutely.
Our next goal is just around, we're going to round it to $75 away. We have $75 per show, and we're going to be able to get some more cameras. We'll get a camera in the control room. We'll get some more cameras out here for individual shots. We'll be able to do a lot more. It'll be some pretty cool stuff for equipment-wise. And then we're also looking to do things like remove the ads. So all the ads, we'll still have breaks, but it will all be like launch calendar, which I don't really think is an ad. And then we'll renovate the second ad so it's something cool and interesting for you guys. But then all of the YouTube ads at the bottom will go away, and all of the overlay mid-roll ads will go away too. So you can just watch the show. It's a completely socially funded show. So if you get value from Space Vidcast, please consider giving value back to Space Vidcast through Patreon. All right, I spent more time on that than I intended to. I'm sorry, guys. All right, so let's do the next comment is from Liam Baker, who says, massive privacy problem. This is regards to the satellite that can take 30 to 90 second HD video clips with extremely great resolution. Says, I know the satellite won't videotape me in my home, but it feels wrong considering the world rotates. It could travel to anywhere in the world. So it's not like a spy satellite is in the U.S. doing this for wars. I screwed that up. But basically, the general gist of it is, this could be used to spy on me. This is a privacy concern. Say no. I blame you, USA. The thing is, Liam.
Oh, Liam.
The actual spy satellites can do this and more already. So this is just a commercially available product so that companies can do cool things. And actually, we could do some good things with it. What you choose to use the technology for, good or evil, isn't the fault of the technology. So this could be used for good. This could be used for finding problems with shipping lines. This could be used for helping to find issues out at sea. There are so many things we can use this for that's more than just spying on people. If we do want to spy on people, we don't need to use this. We have satellites that are so much more powerful than this.
Yeah.
So much more powerful than this. Rest assured, the U.S. is already spying on you with much greater resolution, and they probably can see into your home. I'm going to wear my tinfoil hat, but seriously, the satellites they've got are way more powerful than this. What this does is this makes it commercially available so that we can actually do some things other than spying on you. So I think this is actually a
You're
good
boring,
thing.
Liam. Way to have an ego about that, man.
We're being mean to Liam for some reason. I'm
know,
sorry,
sorry.
Liam. I didn't mean to
That's
be
not
mean.
you.
Didn't mean to. It's us.
It's
not
us.
you. It's us.
It's a little bit you.
Bill says, I think that the money for the Space Launch System isn't totally being wasted. Every NASA program has a percentage of its money that goes to NASA overhead. Not only that, they are learning things along the way that become part of the knowledge base that all of the Space Act Agreement community has access to. That is actually not an unvalid point, which is NASA shares everything. So anything that they learn, we learn too. However, the SLS is based on shuttle grade technology, so we already learned that in the shuttle era. We're relearning things we already knew, so I'm not sure I'm with you on that regard. I don't think I would say that money on SLS is a total waste either. Having a super heavy lift launcher is a good idea. Having something that we don't have to rely on the Russians for is a good idea. I don't think SLS as a whole, like the concept of having a super heavy lift launcher in the US is not a bad idea. I think my personal issue with it, and this is me personally, not the opinion of anyone else, just me, is that the rocket scientists should be designing the rocket. They should be given a budget and say, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to lift, make me something that works. And that is not what happened with SLS. SLS is a jobs program. So it is scary expensive, and you don't get that much out of it because of that. That's my personal issue with it. Did you have anything to add to that one?
No.
All right, okay. There you go. Hector continues on the SLS debate. The Space Launch System is a big runaway train. This is the same issue argued over during the shuttle era. Big vehicle to nowhere. Big project to give it purpose. 10 years late and $6 billion over budget, but it still got pushed through. I don't think the SLS program will be canceled unless there's a major force to stop it, a presidential order. However, some changes in legislation has made the project uncancelable. All in all, this is hard to stop a train, Hector says that. Yeah, I don't disagree. It is very close to uncancelable at this point, much to the joy of certain senators who really, really, really want to see those jobs stay in their district. We'll see what happens with commercial space, right? Commercial space is still young. So who's to say that commercial space will actually be able to pull this off? But if they do, you're going to look at SLS and go, huh? No, what are you laughing at?
Cammy, yes, it does.
What?
Keep going.
Okay. Inside joke. Danny says, didn't sound like sarcasm, so I assume it wasn't. But if you watch your show, there's a Lego man on the mic or whatever that is in front of the table. But anyways, love you guys. I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. Anyhow, that is our show for this week. Any final comments before we go to break? We're like 6 minutes early. I should have. I know. I'm like stretched for. That's all right. It doesn't.
So sorry.
Here's the brilliant thing about being an internet show.
Yes.
We don't have to fill the time. If we ran out of content, we can stop. So we're gonna go ahead and stop. So I'd like to thank everyone so much. I should have added more comments. Here's what happened. Last week's show. You need to look at the comments. 80% of them are about metric.
Right.
And they're all like, yes, use metric, yes, use metric, yes, use metric, yes, use metric, yes, use metric. And there were no launches, so I didn't get to use metric all that much. I got to talk about it on the space plane, and that was it. And then Thomas used metric as well, so that was awesome. So it was an all metric show.
Yay.
But yeah, that was like all, and I didn't want to say, I should have just had like 30 comments of yes, use metric, yes, use metric, yes, use metric.
All of these people said yes.
Yes, use metric. So when we use metric, you can blame them. So Spacevidcast will be using metric from now on. That will be the official measurement standard for Spacevidcast. I think we're getting some huzzahs from around the world, as is coordinated time. So 21, yes, no huzzahs. No. Coordinated time, also our official metric. And one more time, as a reminder, daylight saving is kicking in. So if you change your clock, you're going to have to do it there. And again, thank you to all the Spacevidcast patrons who help make this show go. Patreon.com/SpaceVidcast. I cannot tell you how important that is to the continued success of this show. It really, truly helps make it go. Here's once again the Spacevidcast Premier members who are helping make this happen. Then we've also got the Spacevidcast producers. So the Premier is $10 and up. Spacevidcast producers who are $5 to $10. And of course, we've got the Spacevidcast patrons who are $1 to $4.99. Once again, thank you to all of you for making that happen. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for watching. We're going to go into Spacevidcast After Dark for those of you watching live. And for everyone else, we will see you next week. These guys are what are sponsoring this first news part of the segment. They're what make this show happen. And for more information, and if you'd like to become a Spacevidcast Premier member, please go to patreon.com/SpaceVidcast for more information on that. So let's go ahead and get started with some space news. I think the big thing that really happened this last week was the Senate hearing over the EELV, or Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicles. This was on Wednesday, March 5th, 2014. So just a few days ago. This was between Michael Gass, who's the president of United Launch Alliance, the conglomerate between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, and Elon Musk, the CEO and CTO of Space Exploration Technologies. And as you can imagine, I wanted it to be like an epic wrestling match, right? Where they walk out like
an
fireworks.
Old married couple having like one of those debates of like, no, when you said this last time, that's not what you did.
Oh, like People's Court.
Yeah, that's what I wanted, and that's not what happened.
No, it was jam-packed full of interesting information from both sides. So if you, rather than cut this up into little itty-bitty sound bites, it is like an hour and a half. It's actually worth going in and watching the whole thing. You can find it on YouTube. We'll add a link to it in the show notes. This is the future. Coming up, Senate hearing,
Ukraine,
Cosmos,
and spaceplane.
All that, plus we talk about astronomical property rights. Stay with us. Tomorrow begins now.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. Got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes.
Private space station. Track.
And welcome to Spacevidcast episode 7.07 for Saturday, March 8th, 2014. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me, as always, the beautiful, lovely, wonderful, talented, and Carrie-Ann wife of mine, Carrie-Ann Higginbotham. I didn't get that in the beginning, so I had to change it at the end. We will be your hosts for this episode. Before we get started, we'd like to thank the Spacevidcast Premier members. These are people who have dedicated at least $10 for this specific episode available at patreon.com/spacevid of our military launch system, which is a very large contract, which can help other companies too. So it's a big deal. The key points between the two sides here are, from United Launch Alliance, which is, since they've been formed, they've had 100% success rate. And military launches are not like commercial launches.
Right.
These are billion-dollar satellites. They are extremely important to national security, and you have very specific requirements that they need to maintain. For example, absolute launch readiness at any time.
Right.
And so that's expensive. That costs money. And That's the way it is. And SpaceX basically says, well, okay, except that you're a monopoly, and as you can expect with any monopoly, your prices have gone up. And had you gone with SpaceX's launch services, you could have saved I think it was something like 11.6 billion with a B dollars. That's actually, by the way, half of NASA's entire budget in 1 year. They would have been able to save, according to SpaceX. So two very different sides of the argument. I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong. It's just an interesting debate, and I'd love to know what your comments are. Is it important enough to spend the extra billions of dollars to ensure launch readiness and launch reliability, or should we be looking at commercial partners? But, by the way, doesn't have to.
I think that a lot of us even realize. So the United States can only ferry astronauts on the Soyuz rocket, which is Russian, at $70 million per seat.
Yep.
So there's that. The NASA's commercial crew program may not be able to fly humans until 2017. So it's 2014 now. That's 3 years from now. That's kind of a big gap, considering that NASA, the United States, hasn't flown humans on their own rockets, NASA's rockets or U.S. rockets, really, since 2011. So that's a huge gap.
Retired in the space shuttle.
On the space shuttle. The commercial crew program currently has Boeing, SpaceX, and Sierra Nevada, who are developing crew-capable rockets and spaceships.
But as you mentioned, all of those companies are at least out until 2017.
At least 2017.
Yep.
So even when you're looking at the current U.S.-made or U.S.-companied rockets, of those, the Atlas V, as you were talking about, uses the Russian-made RD-180s, and the Antares rocket uses Ukrainian-built first stage. So those two are like straight out, even if we wanted to try and bring everything back to the U.S.
I mean, SpaceX.
Right. No,
it
absolutely
could
not.
open the door to other providers to be doing military launches as well. Keep in mind, this only impacts military launches. It does not impact commercial launches. And one other point that SpaceX made, which was, look, NASA uses us and we go to the International Space Station. If we're good enough for NASA, I don't understand why we're not good enough for the military. So really interesting. I don't want to call it a heated debate. It wasn't. It was a very
wasn't heated.
mellow, just kind of this the whole way.
Right.
And I was hoping for that people's court yelling, someone throwing lamps across the room.
Right.
That's not what it is. But it is absolutely jam-packed full of information. Highly recommend watching it. Like I said, future of military launch. Speaking of, one of the things that Elon Musk mentioned was that United Launch Alliance right now flies the Delta IV and the Atlas V. And the thing with the Atlas V, the engines, not made in America, they're made in Russia. And we got a little bit of tension going on over there.
Yeah, so for anyone who's been following the Ukraine issue, while it is its own mangled mess of issues, which I did read up on it because I didn't understand exactly what was going on in the first place, but aside from that, the impact it could have on the space industry, particularly in the United States, is actually a lot larger, I think.